Morning, everyone. I've been on a little bit of a submission tear recently, studying the concept. Last time I was up here, I discussed the fact that submission is necessary, that no one can escape it, and that the world has perverted it. I'm sure that helps remind you of the entire lesson, just like that. Today I wanted to hone in a little bit on the challenges that we face as submitting to Christ. I'm using a stylus today, and so I'm not really sure. Oh dear. Let me know. There we go. Oh, I've already made a mistake. That's great. The challenge of submission to Christ. And I've noticed that as I've been studying that almost everything I could say really boils down to be obedient. And then I started thinking, I thought, nearly every sermon probably ought to boil down to be obedient. So, I need to be careful that I'm not repeating myself too terribly much sermon to sermon, and I hope I don't do that. Most of what I'm going to be covering is it generally comes from 1 Peter. I'll be bouncing around. If I had started a little differently, this might have just been an exposition sermon from 1 Peter. And it didn't work out that way in this instance. But there you go. If you'd like to open 1 Peter, we'll certainly be beginning there. So I'm just going to leave this here because I'm already messed up by it. 1 Peter 1:1. 1 Peter, an apostle of Jesus Christ, to those who are elect exiles of the dispersion in Pontus, Galatia, Cappadocia, Asia, and Bithynia, according to the foreknowledge of God the Father and the sanctification of the Spirit, for obedience to Jesus Christ and for sprinkling with his blood, may grace and peace be multiplied to you. What a greeting. But I'd like to focus on this word exiles as it appears in the ESV. The elect exiles, at the beginning of the sentence there in verse 1. We're discussing submission to Christ and the fact that it requires estrangement from the world. And you can see that in this word. The word is translated strangers in the New King James. Strong's, if you look at the definition, says pilgrim, or my favorite, resident foreigner. Strangers, we get the impression of someone you don't know. Exiles, we get of somebody that's been deliberately cast out. Pilgrim, you get the impression of somebody passing through. And all of those are good. Let me see if I can get rid of this dot that I so unwisely placed there already. Erase all ink. Okay, good. Okay. Resident foreigner, you get the impression of somebody who is transient and temporary, but at the same time remaining there for a while. And so that's why I like that concept. It's not there's not necessarily active movement through taking place here. It doesn't necessarily discuss the reason behind that. We don't have this annotation associated with this of badness or exile because you're a political enemy or whatever. It's just, look, you're here, but you're only here for a time. But you are here. So, this world is not my home. We sing the song, this is the concept here. Look, we're here, we're definitely here, but we're not here forever. This is not where we remain. And it's interesting to me as you read this that the concept is assumed. Look, we're behaving as resident foreigners in this world. So, but that's not the point he's saying. He's just reading them. But he uses this word in such a way that they ought to know it, and he knows it, and he knows they ought to know it, and they know he knows it. And so here we are. We're discussing this situation in terms of the suffering that they're going to face, and that's kind of the purpose of his letter to them. But right here, he's just saying, look, you're a resident foreigner. And then he moves on. This is a matter of course. This is the basics. These people know this. He's not going to address that necessarily at length because it should be something that they're entirely familiar with already. Of course, you're a resident foreigner. You're a Christian. You're a foreigner to this world. 1 Peter 2:11, he says it again, and I'd like to consider then what his encouragement to them is based upon this. Beloved, I urge you as, and here it is again, sojourners and exiles. So here's what you are. What do you do as those people, as that person? Abstain from the passions of the flesh, which wage war against your soul. Our home is a spiritual one. You are temporarily in a human body. You are temporarily on this earth. As a temporary resident, how should you behave? There's some practical examples of this to illustrate the point. The resident foreigner does not participate in certain habits of society around them. Okay, that's why he can use this illustration at all. That's why this makes sense. You can identify a resident foreigner because they are different from everything that's going on around them. If that was not the case, what's the point in the terminology at all, right? So this is where I need my pen here for a minute. This is the first time I've tried this, and I apologize if this is too much a distraction. I found a fantastic illustration of what this looks like, I believe, okay, in a book that I enjoy reading every couple of years. Oh, foreigners are awkward externally and uncomfortable internally. That's the point I'm going to try to make here. So you see that, well, that's not one of our traditions. You must not be one of us, right? And this person's going here, I don't know what I'm supposed to do because I don't know what everybody else does, right? This is what a foreigner experiences. So, an example of this in the most physical senses, from Maria von Trapp, the book that inspired The Sound of Music. Okay, she's got a couple of chapters about moving to the United States and what it was like suffering there. And this illustration is amazing, and it's amazing for a couple of reasons, but let's just read it. For the first time in my life, I was confronted with a staircase which moved by itself, an escalator. First I stared at it, thinking this in itself was an exhibition piece, but when I saw people step on it and be moved upwards in front of my eyes, I got an uncomfortable feeling, as though I were witnessing witchcraft. When invited, however, to take the fatal step myself, I most vigorously declined, and then eventually, with a lump in my throat, I put out one foot hesitatingly, but when I touched that moving thing, I quickly drew it back, as if I had been bitten by a snake. And the chapter is called The First 10 Years Are the Hardest. You know, it's the whole idea of trying to get to adjust to these things you've never seen before. She talks about being in a hotel, staying in a hotel in New York City, right? And when she comes down to the lobby, she finds out there's a drugstore there. And she has to leave and come back. Well, I live in the hotel with the drugstore. Well, every hotel had a drugstore. And so she spent a day lost on the streets of New York because she just didn't realize that this was typical. Anyway, here's what a resident foreigner experiences. And we've done a little bit of traveling, and boy, when you're in places, it's just wearisome when you face the world and recognize nothing. It's a difficult experience to describe, but it's tough. But consider for a moment, if this is what a resident foreigner experiences, and we are resident foreigners in the world, let's look at this. I was confronted with and let's just make this, let's see if I can do this. I'm just going to use my finger. Am I crossing it out? Is it going? Sort of, ish? Yeah, kind of, a little bit? All right. The idea is, I'm trying to cross this out here. Let's just say worldly tradition or sin, or yeah, I'm having a hard time. Well, it's sort of crossed out. Okay, sin. Let's say sin. For the first time in my life, I was confronted with sin. First, I stared at it. Okay? Thinking this in and of itself was an exhibition piece. Nobody would have anything to do with that, is essentially what she's saying, right? This is strange and new and foreign to me, and why would I get anywhere close to that? But when I saw people come into contact and be moved by it with my own very eyes, I got an uncomfortable feeling. I saw this happening and I thought, you know what? This isn't right. I'm not used to this. This is not part of my experience in my true home, right? I've not experienced this. I got an uncomfortable feeling as though I were witnessing witchcraft, but she couldn't have done better if she tried, you know? I mean, look, I'm seeing something here that doesn't seem natural. When invited, however, to take the, and I want to circle this one too, fatal step, myself, I most vigorously declined. Okay, we are resident foreigners, and what she's describing here is exactly the feelings and the behavior we're supposed to have when faced with something in the world that we should not be participating in. I most vigorously declined, with a lump in my throat. So this is, the emotion is starting to impact her physically. And when you see a sin that happened, you know, there was a time when, you know, a lot of us might face the sudden passing image of homosexual behavior or whatever and go, lump in throat, you know, gulp. That doesn't happen as much as it used to. I put out one foot hesitatingly, but when it touched the moving thing, I quickly drew it back, as if I had been bitten by a snake. Okay? You want to know what a resident foreigner feels like when faced with something new? We are resident foreigners and we are faced with sin. This is, I couldn't describe it better. I really couldn't, not that I'm aware of. So, there is a description of what that must be like. When you see that sin as a resident foreigner, you're supposed to be like, no way, not even. Nobody's going to convince me to. I might be weak for a minute and hesitate and think about trying it, but no. That's being bit by a snake. You leave that alone. You leave that alone. And now I'm done using this silly thing, and I might not ever do that again. Erase all income slide and move on. Marvelous. 1 John 2:15 says, do not love the world or the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. This has nothing to do with who we are. Can I make those bubbles go away now? Maybe? No? Well, they're just going to have to stay. That's all there is to it. Oh, well, they're back. Whatever. Submission to Christ requires estrangement from the world. Submission to Christ requires behavior that may invite scorn or ridicule. That happens as well. And this is a lesson in and of itself, submission and adversity, and we could dive into that and perhaps will at one point, but not right now. The habits of a foreigner can unintentionally offend the native. That's a fact. Now, when Maria's there, okay, at the escalator, all she's doing is just getting a bunch of angry New Yorkers behind her because she won't get on the stinking escalator, right? That's really all that's going on at that point. But it can get worse than that. I went really quickly. You can find examples of this everywhere. But I went to Traveler.com and said, oh, look, what can you do to offend in a country unintentionally? So, one of the ones that was easy for me, Indian dinner etiquette. Let me read this. From Traveler.com. In India, leaving a small amount of food on your plate indicates you are satisfied. That is not what indicates, that doesn't indicate anything other than you're not interested in the food around here, right? Finishing all your food means you're still hungry. Now, when I think of the work that Janice and I have gone to and others over time to try to make sure that the children finish what's on their plate, particularly when they're visiting someone, okay? Can you imagine if we were just in India, sat down, eat all your food, eat all your food, and everybody, I don't care if that's dog, I don't care if it's loaded with curry, you're going to eat it all. And they eat it all, and then there's 7 people sitting there at their table with empty plates. You know, and these Indians are going, what are we going to do? It's like a slap in the face, or how are we going to provide? Or I don't know exactly why it is this way, but this is the way it is. It's the opposite of what we expect. It's polite to finish your food here. And there it is not. So here we are trying our hardest to be polite, and guess what? You're going to offend somebody. And be aware, yes, in practical situations, but there are also situations where, you know what? You're going to have to plead ignorance, and people are going to have to be patient with you. And there's nothing else you can do about that. And so, whether you are offending somebody for the right reasons or because they're in the wrong or whatever, the fact is you're going to find instances as a foreigner in this world where you have unintentionally offended somebody who's very much a part of it. And you have to, you do what you can with that, but you have to accept that you can't avoid it every time. It's going to happen. We can unintentionally come across as unfriendly, aloof, and stuffy because of the need to submit. We can be seen as irreverent by not submitting to false religion. This should be up here. So, we go a friendly look, come out to the bar with us after work. I get asked this. And the answer is no. Boy, George sure is stodgy. He doesn't like having fun. It was interesting to be asked this most recently because I said, well, I don't really drink. And a coworker said, well, I don't either. And then she said, I don't think actually this girl does either. And it turns out the only one that actually did was the one that was asking. So saying something, then suddenly the realization that they're the odd man out, that was a kind of an interesting thing to experience. But, anything can come up. Look, when somebody cracks a joke you shouldn't be laughing at and you don't laugh. That's socially awkward. What are you supposed to do with that? And then we can be seen as irreverent by not submitting to false religion, right? Why don't you guys put up a nativity scene at Christmas? I'm trying to think of some examples here. But look, why don't you go to church on Christmas Day, or the Easter sunrise service, or whatever it might be? Well, that might look like what the world expects of us to do as religious people, but if it's not submission, we shouldn't be doing it anyway, despite the fact it might cause some discomfort. The Pharisees hated Christ, not because he didn't submit to the old law, but because he didn't submit to the tradition that they had established for everybody else to follow. And yeah, that was a power scheme there, definitely, but the idea is, look, they're saying, why do you do such and such? How many times did they blame him for doing something that violated their rules rather than the law itself? And there was dishonest offense there, but there was also genuine offense. They wouldn't have even thought, you just ate your food without washing your hands, or, sat down with a tax collector. We wouldn't have even thought to have told you you're not supposed to do that, Jesus. Do we encounter these things today? Do we encounter them amongst ourselves? To an extent, I hope not. We shouldn't. If people raise a stink about you can't be in the pulpit unless you're wearing a shirt and a tie. Well, you should wear a shirt. Suit and tie. You must not be a very strong Christian if you get up here in a t-shirt. Those attitudes are out there. Those attitudes are out there, and we need to be careful. And I only gave that illustration because I was wearing a suit and tie today. If we must be held in suspicion. If we must be held in suspicion because of our submission, so be it. It's more important to be submissive. The influence of society, the strain of trying to make sure that we fit in, is strong. But we are resident foreigners, and so it should be our first nature. The things of the world are the second nature that we would have to train ourselves into. We naturally do things that come across as weird to the world around us. Submission requires behavior that can be identified as good. So we were just talking about, look, when you scorn, so though scorn occurs from staining from lusts, proactive good works speaks volumes more. So in other words, yes, I'm not going to go out and drink with you. And that might come across as awkward. And have I taught them something? Perhaps. But if they know it's because I'm doing the things that Christ has set for me to go about doing, there's more there to be learned something. There's a greater lesson. And so we need to consider what standard we employ for ourselves. There's verses that talk about this. I don't bring them up now. But the idea is this. If I come home, I didn't go out to drink after work. That's good. But have I succeeded in the work that Christ has set before me to do? Well, no. That's not the work. That's the basics. Okay, you don't do that so that you can do the real work. There's real work out there. Look, I can't do that because we've got Bible study tonight. That says more. That says more than, no, I can't drink. I mean, who knows what I'm doing? Right? No, I can't drink. I'm going to play somewhere. I don't know what that might be. It seems like when we've got a free night, we're having people over, or Bible study, or whatever might be going on, and that's wonderful. That's the way it should be. But we can fall into a habit, I can fall into a habit, of saying, well, I haven't done the wrong thing, so I'm okay. And that's not the way it works at all. We are created to do good works. Ephesians 2. You are going to be familiar with this. Ephesians 2:8. For by grace you have been saved through faith, and this is not your own doing, it is the gift of God, not as a result of works, so that no man may boast. So are you saved by your works? No. But does that eliminate the need for works? Absolutely not. Verse 10, for we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus, for why? For good works, which God prepared beforehand, that we should walk in them. So, if we have been created for good works, sitting there and saying, no, I'm not going to engage in your sin is not enough to be submissive. We must be doing the things that the world will also identify as good things, that they will coincidentally identify eventually. Don't focus on clearing your name. Focus on glorifying God. I mentioned this recently when we were talking about Daniel. Here Daniel is persecuted by his fellow, they weren't the I don't know, they were the group under the king that were sent to do the king's bidding. He was one of them. There was, as I recall, 3 above the rest, and there was a situation where, look, Daniel had a lot of power, and the people with him had a lot of power. They started persecuting him. And he could have gone about this in such a way to try to self-promote, and he didn't. But what ended up happening in the course of just simply doing what God expected of him, he ended up replacing all of them. And in one sense, retaining more power to do, presumably, the right thing, because he had just focused on what God had expected of him rather than more. Christ is the same way. Did Christ have opportunities to clear his name in the course of the accusations in front of him? Absolutely he did. Okay. I was also thinking of Saul, the apostle. Well, Saul, the pre-Paul apostle. Horrible things done in his life. A reputation that preceded him when he was asked to travel. Right? And what could he do better to make people realize that he had repented than just do what was expected of him to begin with and leave the rest up to God? And did God make those changes as were necessary in the perspectives of the people who feared Saul? Absolutely. Could Saul have done that as effectively by himself? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. So when we're sitting here in a situation that look, we're doing this good thing, and what, you don't do Easter Sunday in the Easter Sunday way, for example, or you don't observe this religious thing out there that we think you ought to be doing, or we've heard about this about you, or you used to be a sinner. You know what? I'm just going to buckle down and do the work, and God will take care of those issues for me. This is not about us. It is about glorifying him. Remember, a good example can go a long way towards convicting a heart. Matthew 5, verse 15. Use the illustration of the lamp and the basket. People do not light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a stand, and it gives light to the whole house. In the same way, let your light shine before others. What's this light? So that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father. This is not about us. This is not somebody saying, oh, look at George's good works. This is about them saying, oh, look at a servant doing what the master expects. Look at that submission that's occurring here. Something different. is going on here. And in the context of foreigners in the land, they've been seeing different. That person can't get on an escalator. That person doesn't do this particular thing. That person doesn't understand the way I behave. That person refuses to participate in the way I behave. I know all these weird things about this person. One of the things that makes them unique is that they are always trying to accomplish a good thing. Well, that's seed getting scattered right there. That's a point at which somebody pauses and thinks, this isn't by, even the accidents aren't by accident. The things that are happening here, I think, well, that was awkward, that was weird. This person has purpose. This person has a goal. This person has a sense of direction. This person seems to be working on behalf of something greater than himself. What's going on? What's going on here? You see that in a person and in their behavior. Submission requires courage to face real suffering. So, you can't just say, no, I'm not going to sin, and you can actually do the work, but then there's work that's really, really hard, really, really painful. Submission is strength. Jesus spoke not a word. Right? He's standing there being accused, being physically assaulted, but he spoke not a word. The persecuted Christians are reminded to guard themselves in 1 Peter 1 verse 6. In this you rejoice, though now for a little while, if necessary, you have been grieved by various trials, so that the tested genuineness of your faith, more precious than gold that perishes, though it is tested by fire, may be found to result in praise and glory and honor at the revelation of Jesus Christ. Look, you're going to face these things. It's a test. Persevere. You're going to make it. Be aware that it's coming. Don't be surprised. We must expect this in 1 Peter 4, a little further on. Beloved, do not be surprised at the fiery trial when it comes upon you to test you, as though some strange thing has happened to you. You're a foreigner. People are going to look at you like you're weird, and they're going to make fun of you and do mean things to you while you are here as a foreigner in their land, unwilling to accept their traditions or behave in their behavior. And while you're going about doing things that none of the rest of them do. We must expect this. This one's for free. The most difficult submission may be the half-hearted submission, because there's no comfort there. Think about the verse I just read. In this you rejoice, though now for a little while, if necessary, you have been grieved by various trials, so that the tested genuineness of your faith may be found to result in praise and glory and honor at the revelation of Jesus Christ. Now, if you have not made that your heart's purpose, if you don't have the faith that Christ really means it, but you're sort of trying a little bit, can you imagine what difficult persecution would feel like? Where you don't have the strength to believe that we can truly accomplish this, and you don't have the comfort to help you, right? So, I hate to bring her up twice in a lesson, but Maria von Trapp, she said, and I don't have it up here, I think I get the quote about right. She's expecting and has to go on a diet for her health. And she says, and she learned then that dieting is nothing more than eating what you've always eaten, but with a guilty conscience. Right? Okay? And if you are half-hearted in your approach to being submissive, then you're sitting there going, well, I kind of believe it, but I don't believe it enough to actually believe he's there helping me, and so you're suffering everything there was to suffer, just like you would have without the submission altogether. So if you're in it all the way, or you're not in it at all. There's no true comfort if you only try a little bit. 1 Peter 3:14, which we have been discussing recently, Dad read this morning, even if you should suffer for righteousness' sake, you will be blessed. Have no fear of them, nor be troubled. Look, we're going to face these situations, but God is there to comfort us. He is there to support us. So, it takes courage when we are here. We are to encourage, the courage part here. One other, and when I use the word encourage, I don't really think of it in the same way I think of the word courage. I sound so stupid saying this out loud, but when we encourage one another, we're supporting one another and making each other happy to be here, I guess, but it's a strength thing. We're supposed to be strengthening each other in what we do. So, there's supposed to be strength. Submission requires the ability to defend the truth. You're not just saying no to sin. Okay? You're doing some of the work. You're not just doing the work. You're doing the really hard work. You're not just doing the really hard work. You're doing the very specific work of teaching other people when something incorrect comes before you. So, what do you have here? Submission is strength. I say it again. We are not just children of God, although we are, and you can't make any illustration walk on all fours here. We are not just servants. although we are. And if you look at some verses, you'll see, well, actually, we're not the servants, we are the children, right? Because we have the inheritance now. But we understand that we're supposed to be doing his work as well. But we're defenders. We're also defenders. We're the soldier. 1 Peter 3:15, the next verse. In your hearts, honor Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason, for the hope that is in you. Yet do it with gentleness and respect. And what's my theme here? We're foreigners. I just hypothesize on the way that people look at us and see that we're different. And here it is, described again. Okay? That anyone who asks you for a reason, the hope of why? Why are you that way? Because if we look weird, the next question comes, why is he different? Oh, he's a resident foreigner. Well, where is he from? I mean, how do we look? That person just did that thing. Where are you from? When we were in Niagara Falls, George and I went and did a thing on the river, and the restrooms there had signs in Mandarin and Oriental languages that were, and pictorial descriptions describing how you should not stand on the toilet and squat, okay? Because apparently that's what they do over there. And so the thing is, why do we need that sign? Okay, well, because there's a lot of foreigners here right now that this is their tradition, okay? So, I mean, you see that sign, and I recognized that the language was Oriental. It was like the pictures. And so I obviously don't know much, but I knew that much. And I didn't really have to ask the question, but the question was, it kind of implied there. Why would I need a sign that says not to do that? Oh, because these people don't know that. Well, where are they from? Well, the language told me where they were from. Right? We are supposed to be defenders as well. And we're supposed to be defenders of the actual truth, not a better world. If this comes across as odd to you for a minute, let me try to explain, because this is specifically for me. I spend a lot of time trying to convince people of factual truths that will make no difference at all once the world burns up. And I need to stop doing that as much as I do it, maybe altogether. But the idea is this: we are not here to... The goal is to convert everybody, so that sounds a little bit odd as well. But we are not here to make the world a better place because of Christianity per se. That should probably happen as more and more come to know the truth. But we have been told the world stinks. We have been told that God is going to destroy it at some point. We are here to point people to a new home altogether. So if I'm going out there and trying to teach people, look, come to Christ and your life will be easier, in some senses that might be true, but that is not what we use to convince them of what they're here to do, because they're in like disappointment. This is the more nuanced version of, come to our church, we have pizza. Well, yeah, you do, but the pizza's going to get it's going to be all gone at some point, and then what? Right? So here we are in a situation where we can teach people the truth, or we can teach people the truth for the right reasons, right? And that is where it really lies. And remember, a sincere but an unprepared soldier is worthless. So this is a little bit of the encourage one another thing too. We need to remember that we are supposed to be receiving instruction and gaining in knowledge in our ability to go out and teach those around us. Also, we are the defense. We are not the prosecution. Colossians 4. Continue steadfastly in prayer. Be watchful with thanksgiving. At the same time, pray for us that God may open to us a door for the word to declare the mystery of Christ, on account of which I'm in prison, that it may be clear, which is how I ought to speak. Walk in wisdom towards outsiders, making the best of the time, and let your speech always be gracious, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how to answer each person. We are there to teach them the truth. When I read 1 Peter 3:15, the end of it says, do it with gentleness and respect. Okay? We are going to be out there unintentionally offending people left and right. Let's find the unoffensive ways to portray the message to the extent that we can. Okay? There are difficult lessons to be learned. Right? And people need to be able to accept those, but at the same time, we need to be able to communicate as gently as we possibly can. God will convict them if they are in sin. Our lives are supposed to show them the truth. God will take care of it after that. Submission requires ability to defend the truth. And lastly, submission requires a submissive heart. External factors vary. Your situation personally changes. I haven't been discussing it all. What's it like for a wife? What's it like for a father? What's it like for children trying to submit? That's not what this lesson was about. But we all face situational differences in our ability to submit as God would have us submit to each other and to Him. And we have societal changes. Look, in one society, submission was pretty emphasized. In another, it's also pretty emphasized, but in an entirely bad way. But we all wrestle in one way or another with a rebellious heart. I have read Romans 8:7, I couldn't tell you how many times. And it's one of those verses where when I was studying this, I just thought, how could I have missed this? How have I never thought about this before? I'm probably the only one in the room, but I just could not believe it. For the mind that is set on the flesh is hostile to God. For it does not submit to God's law. Indeed, it cannot. I don't know what to add to that. For the mind that is set on the flesh is hostile to God, for it does not submit to God's law. Indeed, it cannot. Why is that not one of the memory verses that everybody knows? That's an amazing verse right there. It is simple, it is straightforward, it makes the point, it gets right to the root of the problem. I say heart, it says mind. I'll read it again. For the mind that is set on the flesh is hostile to God, for it does not submit to God's law. Indeed, it cannot. If our hearts, if our minds are unwilling to go there, there is no hope. A brief story here, and we'll be wrapping it up in a moment. This began as a joke. And it's funny at first, but the more you think about it, the sadder it is. Every 10 years, the monks of a certain monastery were allowed to break their vow of silence to speak 2 words. Has anyone heard this before? Lee thinks he has, maybe. When the junior class of monks had their first opportunity, one monk in particular was presented to the abbot to make his statement. It'd been 10 years since the last time he spoke, right? He's been a monk now 10 years. It's his first chance. And so obviously he'd been thinking about it for a while, and he gets up to the abbot and he says very deliberately, and I think I put it up here so you can understand what I'm saying, food bad. The abbot nods, the monk retreats, and he is happy to have made his 2 words mean so much. He saw a problem, he had a complaint, and brought it up. Good use of his work there, of his time. 10 years later, the opportunity presents itself again. Every 10 years, you get a chance to say 2 words. Approaching the abbot, he recites this decade's carefully chosen 2 words. Bed hard. The abbot receives this statement stoically, and the monk retreats for another decade. By his 3rd opportunity, the monk has long since realized nothing will change. He entered the abbot's chamber with purpose, gave the abbot a long stare, and defiantly pronounces, "I quit." And the abbot spoke and said, "I'm not surprised. You've been complaining ever since you got here." And it's funny because, he's only said 6 words, right? But those words were in his heart first, and they were in there for 30 years. And when he had an opportunity to behave in a certain way, all that comes out is what he's had in there the whole time. So in a way, it's funny. At the same time, I read that and go, man, that is tough. Because I'm the biggest complainer in this room, and I mean that sincerely. I really am. Consider how that contrasts with Job's attitude. After all this catastrophe befalls Job, at the very beginning of Job, in verse 22 of chapter 1, in all this Job did not sin or charge God with wrong. And then there's the conversation with his friends, and his wife tells him to disown God, and there's this conversation about, surely you must have sinned because God only punishes those who have sinned, and it goes on and on and on. And at some point, Job hadn't sinned originally, but at some point he comes along and reaches a point where he really asks the question, why? Why do I don't understand what's going on here. And in chapter 40, in one of the couple of instances where it mentions this explicitly, Job answered the Lord after God he asked why, and God comes along and says, what do you know? What do you know? What do you know? What do you know? He spends chapters saying, look, you don't know. You don't understand. You have no right to come to me with this. I do as I see fit, and that's all there is to it. And so in Job 40, verse 3, Job answered the Lord and said, behold, I am of small account. What shall I answer to you? I lay my hand on my mouth. I have spoken once, and I will not answer. Twice, but I will proceed no further. Job is reminded. The reminder is good. Job did right. He was a good man. But when he came up and said, somebody please justify what has happened to me, God says, I'm God, and I don't need to justify this. He didn't complain. He wanted to understand more, and sometimes we're not granted that. But if you contrast this with a person who sits there and every opportunity can find something wrong with what God has deemed appropriate for their life, we have a heart that's not submissive, and we all face the challenge of being submissive in our heart. Submission, like the monk, is a lifetime of silence. You know, better off he kept his mouth shut. You know? At the same time, it's a lifetime of peace. A moment ago, I read Romans 8:7 3 times. The next verse, Romans 8:8. To set the mind on the Spirit is life and peace. We're resident foreigners. We are required to be submissive, and that is going to make us uncomfortable here, and it is going to make us look awkward to the people around us. And while this is going on, we're facing battles out there and within ourselves as we try to handle this. But if we aren't half-hearted, if we aren't lukewarm, if we really believe God when he says something, if when he tells us something, we put our hand over our mouths and think, you know what? I'm just here while I'm here to do the work, and then I'm gone, and God is good. If we can do that, then in that attitude, in that submissive heart, we find peace. I don't know if anybody has ever said it's easy. I'm probably not an authority on the matter whatsoever, but I know it's not easy for me. And that's why we're here, to encourage one another. I hope you've been encouraged. If there's any specific way that we can help you be more encouraged, if you need specific prayers over difficulty in regards to submission or anything else, there is always another opportunity to do so as long as God allows. And we will now sing our invitation song if you'd like to stand.
Number 263 is that.